There comes a moment, often quietly, when you realize that the body you've lived in your entire life is changing. Perhaps it's the first time you notice a slight unsteadiness when standing up. Perhaps it's the sensation that your balance isn't quite what it used to be, or that recovery from exertion takes a little longer than it once did. These small signals are easy to dismiss, easy to attribute simply to the passage of time. But what if these changes are not inevitable in the way we assume? What if the gradual decline we've been taught to expect is not a fixed destination, but something far more negotiable? There is a growing body of observation, gathered from populations around the world and across generations, that suggests the way we age is shaped less by the calendar than by a series of deeply interconnected systems we can actually influence. And the most overlooked of these systems may surprise you. You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. The unfolding years, a calm exploration of how we age well. There is a question that arrives quietly, often in the middle decades of life, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. It does not arrive with urgency or panic, but with a gentle persistence. The question is simply this: what does it mean to grow older well? For much of human history, this question was answered by circumstance. To reach an advanced age was itself a victory, a matter of luck and genetics and fortune. But something has shifted in recent generations. For the first time, large numbers of human beings can expect to live not just into old age, but well into old age. The question is no longer simply about reaching a certain number of years. It has become about the quality of those years, about what researchers now call health span rather than just lifespan. This distinction matters enormously. Lifespan is the total number of years a person lives. Health span is the number of years they live in good health, with mobility, with clarity of mind, with the ability to engage in the activities that make life meaningful. For much of the 20th century, these two measures tended to diverge. Medical advances kept people alive longer, but often with chronic conditions that limited their quality of life. The goal now, for many researchers and for individuals thinking carefully about their own futures, is to bring health span closer to lifespan, to compress the period of decline into as short a time as possible. What follows is an exploration of how this might be approached, not through extreme measures or untested interventions, but through a patient understanding of how the human body actually ages, and what can be done to support its natural processes. This is not a guide to cheating death or reversing time. It is something quieter and perhaps more valuable, a consideration of how to live well within the years we have. Part 1. The architecture of aging. To understand how to age well, it helps first to understand what aging actually is. This is not as simple as it sounds. Aging is not a single process, but a collection of them, unfolding simultaneously across different systems of the body. It is like a large house with many rooms, each aging at its own pace, influenced by its own conditions. At the most basic level, aging can be understood as a gradual decline in the body's ability to maintain homeostasis, the internal balance that keeps everything running smoothly. A younger body responds quickly to challenges. It regulates temperature efficiently, repairs damaged cells promptly, fights off infections with speed and precision. An older body can still do these things, but more slowly, less efficiently, with less reserve capacity. This decline is not uniform. Some 80-year-olds have the immune function of people decades younger. Some 60-year-olds have balance and mobility that would challenge someone half their age. This variation tells us something important. While chronological age is fixed, biological age is more flexible. It is influenced by genetics, certainly, but also by environment, by activity patterns, by nutrition, by the accumulation of small choices made over many years. Researchers who study longevity have identified several recurring patterns in the bodies of people who age well. These patterns are not secrets or miracles. They are observable phenomena that tend to appear across different populations, different cultures, different eras. Understanding them provides a kind of map, not of guaranteed outcomes, but of tendencies and probabilities. One of the most consistent observations is that people who maintain physical function into advanced age tend to have certain characteristics in common. They tend to move regularly, not necessarily intensely, but consistently. They tend to eat in patterns that avoid extreme blood sugar fluctuations. They tend to maintain social connections and a sense of purpose. They tend to sleep well. They tend to manage stress in ways that do not chronically activate the body's emergency response systems. None of this is surprising in isolation. What is worth considering is how these factors interact, how they support and amplify each other. Movement affects metabolism. Metabolism affects sleep. Sleep affects cognitive function. Cognitive function affects social engagement. Social engagement affects mood and motivation. These are not separate domains of life, but interconnected systems, each influencing the others in ways that are only beginning to be understood. Part 2. The body in motion. There is a concept in physiology that is worth considering when thinking about aging and movement. It is called mechanotransduction, and it describes the process by which cells convert mechanical stress into chemical activity. In simpler terms, when you apply force to your body, your cells respond by triggering various biological processes. This is why movement matters so much, and why its effects go far beyond the obvious benefits to muscles and cardiovascular health. When you walk, when you lift, when you stretch, you are not just exercising in the conventional sense. You are sending signals to your cells. Signals that influence everything from bone density to immune function to cognitive performance. Consider what happens when you stand on one foot. It looks simple, perhaps even trivial. But beneath the surface, a remarkable coordination is taking place. Your eyes are sending information about your position relative to the horizon. Your inner ears are sensing the motion and orientation of your head. The nerves in your ankles and feet are firing constantly, reporting the subtle shifts in pressure and tension. Your brain is processing all of this information in real time, making micro-adjustments to dozens of muscles to keep you upright. This is not just balance practice. It is whole system training. It keeps the vestibular system sensitive and responsive. It maintains the neural pathways that connect the body to the brain. It preserves the strength of the small, stabilizing muscles that are easy to ignore until they become weak. When this system is not challenged regularly, it degrades. The signals become weaker. The processing becomes slower. The adjustments become coarser. What was once automatic becomes deliberate, then difficult, then impossible. The principle here is one that appears throughout biology. Use it or lose it. Tissues that are not regularly stimulated begin to atrophy. Neural connections that are not frequently activated become pruned away. This is not a flaw in the design. It is an efficiency mechanism. The body is constantly reallocating resources based on demand. If you do not ask certain systems to work, the body assumes they are not needed and redirects energy elsewhere. This is why movement patterns matter more than movement quantity. Someone who walks 5 miles a day on smooth, flat surfaces is getting cardiovascular benefit. Certainly. But they may not be challenging the balance and proprioceptive systems that are essential for preventing falls. Someone who spends time on uneven ground, who practices standing on one leg while waiting for tea to steep, who turns their head while walking to look over their shoulder, is providing a richer variety of signals to the nervous system. The type of movement also matters for bone health. Bones are living tissue that respond to stress. When muscles pull on bones during resistance activities, the bones respond by becoming denser and stronger. This is why weight-bearing exercise is consistently associated with lower rates of osteoporosis and fewer fractures in older populations. The stress does not need to be extreme. It simply needs to be regular and varied. There is also the question of what happens when we stop moving for extended periods. Studies of bed rest, both intentional and illness-related, show how quickly the body degrades without the stimulus of gravity and movement. Muscle mass declines measurably within days. Bone density begins to drop. Insulin sensitivity decreases. Cardiovascular fitness diminishes. These changes are reversible when movement resumes, but the reversal becomes slower with age. The implication is not that everyone must engage in intensive exercise programs. It is that regular, varied movement throughout the day, every day, provides a baseline signal that tells the body to maintain its systems. A walk after meals, gardening, carrying groceries, standing instead of sitting when possible. These are not just activities. They are conversations with the body, reminders that its capabilities are still needed. Part 3. The metabolic landscape. If movement is the signal, metabolism is the terrain on which that signal operates. Metabolism is often discussed in terms of weight management, but its role in aging is far broader. It influences inflammation, cellular repair, hormone regulation, and energy availability. It is, in many ways, the central organizing principle of the body's internal environment. One of the most consistent observations in longevity research is that people who live long, healthy lives tend to have stable blood sugar. They do not experience dramatic spikes and crashes. Their cells remain sensitive to insulin, the hormone that ushers glucose from the bloodstream into cells where it can be used for energy. When cells become resistant to insulin, glucose lingers in the blood, causing damage to proteins and blood vessels, and the body must produce more insulin to compensate, which creates its own set of problems. This condition, insulin resistance, is not an inevitable part of aging. It is strongly influenced by diet and activity patterns. When the body is regularly presented with more glucose than it can immediately use, it must store the excess, first as glycogen in the liver and muscles, and then, when those stores are full, as fat. Over time, the constant demand for insulin exhausts the cells that produce it, and the cells throughout the body become less responsive to its signal. The dietary patterns that support metabolic health are not mysterious, though they have been obscured by decades of conflicting advice and food industry marketing. They tend to emphasize whole foods over processed ones. They include adequate protein, which supports muscle maintenance and provides satiety. They include fats from sources that do not promote inflammation. They include carbohydrates primarily from sources that release their sugars slowly, such as vegetables, legumes, and whole grains, rather than quickly, as with refined flours and added sugars. But beyond the specifics of what to eat, there is a deeper principle worth considering. It is the principle of timing. When you eat appears to matter almost as much as what you eat. The body operates on circadian rhythms that influence how it processes food. Insulin sensitivity is higher earlier in the day and decreases as the day progresses. Eating late at night means consuming food at a time when the body is less prepared to handle it metabolically. There is also the question of eating frequency. Constant grazing, eating small meals throughout the day, keeps insulin levels elevated for longer periods. This may sound like a sensible way to avoid hunger, but it denies the body the opportunity to spend time in a fasted state, when insulin is low in other processes, including cellular repair mechanisms, become more active. The traditional pattern of 3 meals with no snacking, or the more recent practice of time-restricted eating, both allow for extended periods without food intake. This is not to suggest that everyone should adopt a particular eating schedule. Individual variation is real and significant. Some people function better with earlier meals, some with later ones. Some feel best with 3 meals, others with 2. The pattern that emerges from the research is simply that giving the body regular breaks from digestion, periods when it is not actively processing food, appears to support metabolic health over the long term. There is also the question of protein distribution. Muscle protein synthesis, the process by which the body repairs and builds muscle tissue, is stimulated by protein intake. But there appears to be a ceiling effect. The body can only use a certain amount of protein at one time for muscle building. Consuming most of the day's protein in a single large meal may be less effective than spreading it across multiple meals. This becomes increasingly relevant with age, as the body becomes somewhat less responsive to protein signals, a condition sometimes called anabolic resistance. Part 4. The nervous system and its demands. The nervous system is the body's communication network, and like any network, its performance depends on the quality of its connections. With age, these connections can become slower, less reliable, more prone to interference. But here again, the rate of decline is not fixed. It is influenced by how the system is used. Consider attention. In a younger brain, focusing on a single task while ignoring distractions is relatively effortless. In an older brain, it may require more conscious effort. This is sometimes interpreted as a decline in cognitive ability, but it may be more accurately understood as a change in how the brain allocates its resources. The older brain has more experience, more stored information, more connections to draw upon. This is an advantage in many situations, but it also means there is more activity to manage, more signals to filter. The brain, like muscles, responds to challenge. When it is regularly engaged in complex tasks, it maintains its ability to handle complexity. When it is allowed to operate on autopilot, following familiar routines without variation, it becomes less flexible. This is why novelty appears to be protective. Learning a new skill, navigating an unfamiliar environment, engaging in conversations that require genuine attention. All of these provide the kind of stimulation that maintains neural plasticity. But the nervous system is not just the brain. It is the entire network of nerves that extends throughout the body. The health of this network depends on blood supply, on the integrity of the myelin sheath that insulates nerves, on the absence of chronic inflammation that can damage nerve tissue. Factors that support cardiovascular health tend to support nervous system health as well. The same dietary patterns that protect blood vessels also protect the small blood vessels that nourish nerves. There is also the question of stress. The nervous system evolved to handle acute threats, the kind that require immediate action and then resolve. A modern environment provides fewer acute threats, but more chronic ones. Financial pressure, social conflict, information overload, constant notifications. The nervous system responds to these chronic stressors as it would to physical threats. By activating the sympathetic nervous system, the branch associated with fight or flight. But because the stressors do not resolve, the activation does not fully subside. Over time, chronic sympathetic activation takes a toll. It elevates blood pressure. It impairs digestion. It disrupts sleep. It promotes inflammation. It accelerates the shortening of telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes that are associated with cellular aging. The antidote is not the absence of stress, which is neither possible nor desirable, but the regular activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, the branch associated with rest and repair. This is where practices that promote calm become relevant. Deep breathing, time in nature, engaging in activities that produce a state of focused attention, sometimes called flow. These are not luxuries or indulgences. They are physiological interventions. ways of signaling to the nervous system that it is safe to downshift into recovery mode. The body cannot maintain a state of high alert indefinitely without consequences. It needs periods of genuine rest. Part 5. The social tissue. There is a tendency, when discussing health and aging, to focus on individual factors. What a person eats, how much they exercise, whether they take certain supplements. But this focus on the individual overlooks something that consistently emerges as one of the strongest predictors of long-term health: the quality of a person's social connections. The research here is remarkably consistent. People with strong social ties tend to live longer. They have lower rates of heart disease, depression, cognitive decline. They recover more quickly from illness. They report higher levels of life satisfaction. These effects are not small. They are comparable in magnitude to the effects of smoking cessation or physical activity. The mechanisms are multiple. Social support provides practical assistance in times of need. It provides emotional regulation, a buffer against stress. It provides accountability for health behaviors. But there may be something deeper at work as well. Humans evolved as social creatures. Isolation, for much of human history, meant danger. The body may interpret prolonged isolation as a threat signal, activating stress responses that, over time, accelerate aging. This is not to say that everyone needs a large social network. Introverts are not at a disadvantage simply because they prefer smaller circles. The quality of connections matters more than the quantity. A few close relationships provide as much benefit as many superficial ones. What matters is that the connections are genuine, that they involve mutual care and attention. There is also the question of purpose, which is related to social connection but not identical to it. Purpose is the sense that one's life has meaning, that one's actions matter to something beyond oneself. It can come from work, from family, from creative expression, from spiritual practice, from community involvement. However it arises, purpose appears to be protective. People with a strong sense of purpose show lower rates of cognitive decline, better physical function, longer lives. Purpose may work, in part, by motivating behavior. Someone with a reason to get up in the morning is more likely to engage in the activities that maintain health. But it may also work more directly. Having a sense of purpose appears to influence the stress response, making challenges feel more manageable, less threatening. It provides a framework for interpreting events, for placing difficulties in a larger context. The challenge, in a culture that often equates value with productivity, is that purpose can seem elusive after retirement or after children leave home. But purpose does not require a job or a traditional role. It can be found in mentoring, in volunteering, in creative work, in deepening relationships, in learning, in simply being present for others. The key is that it involves engagement with something beyond the self. Part 6. The built and natural environment. Much of the discussion about healthy aging focuses on what individuals can do, as if health were purely a matter of personal choices. But choices are always made within environments, and environments shape choices in ways that are easy to overlook. Consider the physical environment. A neighborhood with sidewalks and safe crossings encourages walking. One without them discourages it. A home with stairs provides incidental exercise throughout the day. A single-story home on one level does not. A kitchen stocked with whole foods makes preparing healthy meals easier. One stocked with processed foods makes them harder to avoid. These environmental factors are not trivial. They shape behavior through convenience and habit, not through conscious decision. The path of least resistance is the one most traveled. When the healthy choice is also the easy choice, it tends to be made more often. When it requires extra effort, it tends to be made less often, even by people with good intentions. The natural environment matters as well. Time spent in nature is consistently associated with better health outcomes. Lower blood pressure, reduced stress hormones, improved mood, faster recovery from illness. The reasons are not fully understood, but they may relate to the way natural environments engage attention. Unlike urban environments, which demand constant vigilance, natural environments allow for a different kind of attention, softer, more diffuse, more restorative. There is also the question of light exposure. The body's circadian rhythms are set primarily by light. Morning light, particularly the kind that comes from being outdoors, helps synchronize these rhythms, promoting better sleep at night and better alertness during the day. Evening light, particularly the blue light from screens, can disrupt this synchronization, delaying sleep and reducing its quality. These effects become more pronounced with age, as the circadian system becomes somewhat less robust. The indoor environment matters for reasons beyond light. Indoor air can be more polluted than outdoor air, depending on ventilation, cleaning products, building materials. Chronic exposure to low levels of pollutants may contribute to inflammation, to respiratory problems, to cardiovascular stress. Simple measures, like opening windows regularly and using ventilation fans, can reduce this exposure. Part 7. The integration of systems. The preceding sections have examined different domains of health separately, as if they were independent. But this separation is artificial, a convenience for discussion rather than an accurate description of how the body works. In reality, these systems are deeply integrated. Changes in one ripple through others. Consider inflammation. It is not a disease but a response, the body's way of protecting itself from harm. Acute inflammation, the kind that follows an injury, is essential for healing. But chronic inflammation, the kind that persists without a clear threat, is associated with nearly every age-related condition. It damages blood vessels, contributes to insulin resistance, impairs brain function, accelerates cellular aging. What drives chronic inflammation? Many things. Poor diet, particularly one high in refined carbohydrates and industrial oils. Sedentary behavior, chronic stress, inadequate sleep, social isolation, environmental toxins. Each of these factors contributes to inflammation, and they do so additively. A person with several of these risk factors has more inflammation than the sum of what each factor would produce alone. This is why isolated interventions often disappoint. Changing one aspect of lifestyle while leaving others unchanged may produce some benefit, but less than might be expected. The body is a system. Improving it requires addressing the system, not just individual components. The same integration applies to benefits. Improved sleep enhances metabolic function. Better metabolic function supports brain health. Stronger social connections reduce stress. Less stress improves immune function. Each positive change makes other positive changes more likely. The process can become self-reinforcing, a virtuous cycle instead of a vicious one. This is also why small changes, consistently applied, can produce meaningful results over time. The body responds to cumulative exposure, not to isolated events. A single healthy meal does little. Thousands of healthy meals, over years, shape metabolism profoundly. A single walk does little. Thousands of walks, over decades, maintain cardiovascular function and muscle mass and balance and mood. Part 8. The question of decline. It would be misleading to suggest that aging is entirely malleable. That with enough effort, decline can be avoided entirely. Some changes are inherent to the passage of time. Cells accumulate damage that cannot be fully repaired. Telomeres shorten. The immune system becomes less effective at recognizing new threats. Hormone levels change. These are not failures of lifestyle. They are the natural consequences of being alive. The question is not whether these changes occur, but how quickly they occur and how much they affect function. The goal is not to stop the clock, but to slow its hands, to maintain capacity as long as possible, to compress the period of significant decline into as short a time as possible. This is where the concept of reserve becomes relevant. Reserve is the buffer the body maintains, the extra capacity beyond what is needed for daily function. A young person has enormous reserve. They can lose significant function and still manage normal activities. An older person has less reserve. A small loss that would go unnoticed in youth can push them below the threshold needed for independence. Building reserve takes time. It happens through the accumulation of small efforts. The daily choices that maintain muscle, that preserve bone density, that keep neural pathways active. It cannot be built quickly when it is needed. It must be built slowly, patiently, over years. This is why the work of aging well begins long before it is obviously needed. A person in their 50s who maintains strength and balance is not just investing in their present comfort. They are building the reserve that will determine whether they can live independently in their 80s. A person in their 60s who maintains social connections and cognitive engagement is not just enjoying their current life. They are building the cognitive reserve that will protect against decline in later decades. Part 9. The gentle path. There is a way of approaching all of this that is worth considering. It is not the way of discipline and sacrifice, of forcing oneself to follow strict rules. That approach may work for some, but for many, it leads to cycles of effort and exhaustion, of progress and relapse. The alternative is gentler. It is the way of curiosity and attention. Paying attention to how different foods make you feel. Noticing how your body responds to different kinds of movement. Observing the quality of your sleep after different evening routines. This is not about following rules. It is about learning your own patterns, your own responses, your own needs. This approach acknowledges that human beings are not machines. We do not respond uniformly to interventions. What works for one person may not work for another. What feels sustainable to one may feel impossible to another. The goal is not to find the perfect protocol. The ideal routine that research suggests is optimal. The goal is to find the pattern that works for you, that you can maintain, that supports your health without dominating your life. This is also the approach that acknowledges the role of joy. Movement that is enjoyed is more likely to be continued than movement that is endured. Food that is appreciated nourishes not just the body but the spirit. Relationships that bring pleasure sustain us in ways that dutiful obligations cannot. Health is not ultimately about living longer. It is about living better. About having the capacity to engage in the activities and relationships and experiences that make life worth living. Part 10. The long view. There is a tendency, in discussions of health and aging, to focus on the near term. What to eat this week? How to exercise today? What supplement to take? But the changes that matter most are those that unfold over decades. They are not dramatic. They are not noticeable from one day to the next. They accumulate slowly, imperceptibly, until one day you realize that you are moving differently, feeling differently, living differently than you did years before. This is both challenging and liberating. It is challenging because it requires patience, because the rewards of effort are not immediately apparent. It is liberating because it means that small, consistent actions are enough. You do not need to transform your life overnight. You do not need to adopt extreme measures. You simply need to make choices, day after day, that point in the direction you want to go. The direction itself matters. Health is not a destination, but a bearing. There is no point at which you arrive, no finish line where the work is done. There is only the ongoing process of living, of making choices, of responding to the body's changing needs. This is not a failure of the approach. It is simply the nature of being alive. The people who age best, the research suggests, are not those who fight aging most aggressively. They are those who adapt to it most gracefully. They accept that change is inevitable while maintaining that decline is not. They adjust their activities to match their changing capacities while continuing to challenge those capacities. They find meaning in each stage of life rather than mourning the stages that have passed. This is the long view. It is not about maximizing any single measure of health or performance. It is about maintaining, for as long as possible, the ability to live the life you want to live. It is about preserving the connections that matter, the activities that bring joy, the sense of purpose that gives meaning to days. Part 11. The quiet practice. If there is a single practice that underlies all of this, it might be attention. Attention to the body, to its signals, to its needs. Attention to the mind, to its patterns, to its responses. Attention to the environment, to how it shapes behavior. Attention to the people around us, to the quality of our connections with them. This attention does not require special training or equipment. It simply requires slowing down enough to notice. Noticing how you feel after a meal. Noticing the quality of your balance when you stand on one foot. Noticing the tension in your shoulders when you are stressed. Noticing the ease in your breathing when you are calm. This noticing is itself a form of intervention. It brings unconscious processes into awareness, and awareness creates the possibility of choice. You cannot change what you do not notice. You cannot adjust what you do not observe. The simple act of paying attention, of being present with your own experience, is the foundation on which all other changes are built. The practice is quiet. It does not demand attention from others. It does not require announcements or declarations. It is simply the ongoing work of living with awareness, of making choices that align with what you value, of adjusting course when you drift. It is available at any age, in any condition, at any moment, and it is enough. Not because it guarantees any particular outcome, but because it is the only way to engage fully with the life you have. The years will pass regardless. The question is whether you will be present for them, whether you will meet them with awareness and intention, whether you will live them as fully as possible. This is what it means to age well. Not to avoid change, but to meet it with attention. Not to prevent decline, but to slow its progress and adapt to its reality. Not to live forever, but to live fully in the time you have. The research is clear on the patterns that support this. Movement, nutrition, sleep, connection, purpose, environment. These are not secrets. They are not mysteries. They are simply the conditions under which human beings tend to thrive. The work is not in discovering them, but in applying them, day after day, year after year, in the quiet practice of living well. And that practice, for all its simplicity, is perhaps the most profound thing we can do with our time. It is the work of a lifetime, and it is never too late to begin. The single most important idea to carry forward is this. Aging well is not about avoiding change, but about meeting it with awareness, with patience, and with the quiet practice of small, consistent choices that honor the body you live in. If this reflection has sparked something in you, some recognition or question of your own, we would be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you would like to continue exploring this archive of healthy aging wisdom, we invite you to explore other videos in the library and to subscribe so that you do not miss the conversations ahead. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.